there's tons of other people who have the same sets of values, right? In fact, we've hired some of them, right? So, or married some of them and then hired them or whatever, right?
We haven't done it the other direction, but yeah, it's true. Yeah.
Butterscotch
Shenanigans. Hey everybody, welcome to episode 455 of Coffee with Butterscotch, the game dev comedy podcast of Butterscotch Shenanigans. I'm Seth and I'm the games programmer.
I'm Adam, I'm the miscellaneous programmer.
I'm Sam and I'm the artiste.
And this is a show where we talk about life, business, and working in the games industry. Today is February 16th, 22x4. Before we get started, we have a warning. There's going to be profanity in this show. And we'd also like to thank our recurring supporters over at moneygrab.bscotch.net. Thank you so much for letting us grab your money every month to help support this podcast. All right, listen up. Last week, we did a whole ass episode about localization. It was pretty fun, pretty interesting topic. If you're interested in that, go back, give that thing a listen. But this week we decided let's just do some questions because, we sort of didn't last week.
Yeah.
So we want to know what you want to know. So let's just head on over to our questions over podcast.bscotch.net.
What you wanted to know is what because we don't know,
We don't know if you still want to know, but
Well,
some of these questions might
enough.
be a little old. I don't know.
Yeah.
We'll see. Highest upvoted question comes from UppasitFlitwip, who says, Hey, B-Scotch gang, was curious how you guys decide on how to price your game or games.
Ooh, fun.
It definitely seems hard to gauge something like that when you have a whole studio of people to pay and have literally years of development ahead without knowing how much the game is going to be able to make for you. Curious how you guys end up getting that number. Also related, how much are you going to charge for Crashlands 2?
All right.
I'll answer the second question, which is don't know that one yet. So I'm not even going to.
This is one of those we will not decide until we absolutely have to kinds of questions.
So how do we decide when
I
we
think we talked about this a little bit before, which is that the opposite asks a question in an interesting way, which is that it's framed in part around the idea of how much money you can make or you need to make, right? Because you're paying people for development and stuff. And unfortunately, the amount of money that it costs you to make something is not necessarily related to the amount of money that you get to ask people to pay you for it, right?
It does is that a commodity? Is that the name for like the thing where there's like a pretty direct input-output kind of relationship of like it costs us this much in like resources and people to make the thing, so we sell it for that much.
Yeah, I don't know.
Is whatever.
Yeah, but basically,
that's not how it works.
It's a question of like in a standard way of thinking about economics. There's your supply and demand curve, right? Which you basically say like, okay, I think that if I sell my game for $20, I will sell 100,000 copies. Therefore, I'll make X dollars, right? If I sell it for $15, then I'll sell more copies, but I need to sell enough more copies that it compensates for the change in price. Right?
It's cheaper. Yep.
That's how you would think about most things, right? And then like in economics, people talk about some basic stuff like substitution theory, which is, okay, well, if something gets too expensive, then people will say, well, I'll buy something else that's similar, right? Oh, my favorite brand of butter is too expensive now at the grocery store. I'll buy the generic brand, right?
Doesn't work for media, for things that are one of a kind.
It doesn't work for games for a bunch of specific reasons. One is that people do not know what it is that they are buying.
Yep.
And the price is actually an incredibly important indicator of the value of the experience. So something that I think we probably mentioned this quite a while back about the first Crashlands game. We launched it on Steam at $15. Mm-hmm. And after a while, we were looking at how the game was responding to sales and stuff like that. And we, kind of roped in this economic theory. And we were like, well, it looks like if we drop it to $10, we will make more money because we'll sell enough extra copies, right? And so it's like, great, win-win. We get more money. More people get to play the game. It's cheaper. Perfect.
But we would need to sell, because if it's going from $15 to 10, then we would need to be selling. Percents are always weird when you start, like it seems obvious.
You sell 50% more copies.
Yeah, I'm pretty sure that's right. Yeah, every 50% stuff, I'm like, do I need to take one over this to get the right number or one minus it to get the right number, But it's 50% more copies. So that's a lot more copies.
It's a lot more copies. And what we found was that, so we reduced the price to $10 and we sell 0% more copies.
Demand stayed the same.
Yep.
Actually, there was a short period of time
It
where it
actually
went
did
down.
worse for a little bit. Yeah.
Demand dipped.
So-
And there's a reason for that, right? Which is, again, like I said, price is a signal also to a consumer about how good the good is, right?
Yeah.
Yep.
If something's priced like $30, $40 as a video game, if you're hitting like 30 and $40, you know now that you're in the what you'd call, I think, like either triple-I or AA tier, which is like they're higher investment games that typically have been working on for a longer period of time.
Yeah.
If you're in the like $60, $70 space, you're in AAA territory. And if you're in the like 20, 25 and under, I guess maybe like 15 to 25 is like the top tier indie space. And then like sub that
15 below
like
is any random thing that's some random.
anything. Yeah.
And if you think about this logically, right? So like, let's take a game like Nuclear Throne, for example.
Mm-hmm.
You could play Nuclear Throne for like 200 hours if you wanted to. Mm-hmm. It's a roguelike. It's got like infinite replayability. And there are some games that are AAA games that cost $60 that you could maybe play for 10 hours and be kind of done with it,
Mm-hmm.
right? If Nuclear Throne charged $60, people would be like, what the fuck is this?
Yeah, I'm not buying
Why is this $60? I'm not buying this for $60. Because again, price of a game has nothing to do with what is actually going on with the game, the experience, the amount of playtime, whatever. The game gets kind of locked in and like it's pegged into a spot in the market based on consumer perception, and it has to operate within that.
Yes.
Because
Well,
price is always what people are willing to pay. That's the only thing it's related
That's it.
to.
And the reason that people are willing to pay for things is dumb in terms of like people's rationales for why they would not pay $60 for Nuclear Throne, but they would pay $60 for some AAA game that they throw away after 5 hours. Is their rationale is, well, it's a big budget game.
It costs more.
What does
to
that?
make.
What does that mean?
Yeah.
Well,
It has
think
better
it's
graphics.
Well,
What does that mean?
I think it's the idea that like that because people also have this idea with all kinds of stuff, right? Where like, well, people still think of price as basically related to the cost of making the thing, right? So,
Yes.
So they basically, if they're looking at like a Nuclear Throne versus a big budget AAA game, they're like, well, this cost way less to make, therefore I shouldn't have to pay as much for it as actually. But it's not that clean because people also will pay more if they think it looks better to them, right, and so on, right. So how people decide what price seems fair, because also, and even though Seth, you're saying like the time spent, all that kind of stuff. Once people do start playing a game, they keep reevaluating how much they paid for it based on their experience of the game after the fact, right? And that's where you get all those complaints where if a game seems short, but the cost actually just, if it seems short, period, but especially if it seems short and the cost was relatively high for games like that, whatever that means, right? Then that's where you get all those complaints of people being like, oh, it's not worth it. I only got to play for 12 hours for this $20 game or whatever, right? Mm-hmm. And now they start doing like a price per dollar, like $1 per hour of experience kind of a thinking, which they don't apply in most other contexts, right?
Which doesn't apply in basically any other context. Nobody cares about that for books, movies, vacations. Any other life experience is not evaluated in dollars per hour of entertainment. Only games get this comment.
Well, and only by a subset of people, right? Because I think the interesting thing here is that the reality is then that in order to price a game effectively, what you have to do is be able to just ask the question either to yourself in that vague way where you're asking the multitudes through yourself, or literally ask the multitudes and be like, what other games look, and this is important, look like the game that I have? And I mean it.
Or feel like
sense.
even.
Or feel like, that's the one. But the look one is important because you can make a game that is, say, like kind of an uglier 2D thing that feels like, I don't know, some like big badass, kind of top-down-y turn, I don't know, Baldur's Gate. It could feel like that because it's like there's a story and it's turn-based and it's got these cool like combat mechanics.
Like Fallout 2 or something, like Fallout 2 versus Baldur's Gate, right? Same vibe actually, but experience
kind of
and appearance-wise very different.
Very different. It's so I think importantly you have to look along both those dimensions, but actually have err on the looks like one. Because again, these are experienced goods, which means people don't really know how good it is until they're in it. And so,
well, what it looks like is also what gives people the impression of how much it costs to make.
Exactly. Because point being, like, if Nuclear Throne was remade in Unreal Engine, then you could charge $60 for it, even though it would have exactly the same mechanics.
But also, it would have been easier to make.
If you could charge probably $30 for it.
Yeah,
you would never be able to charge $60 for it. I think because
you have to come from a AAA studio to do that.
Well, it's a scale problem thing, which is like it's one thing. Graphics in the general sense, like you got nice shaders. There's like 3D models doing stuff. But like the level of stuff happening in a AAA title, as far as like what you just see on screenshots for rails, it is just different. Like it's on another fucking level, right? On a visual standpoint.
I don't think. Well, yeah, on a visual standpoint, yeah, I guess.
Yeah, it definitely is. And so it's like I think what it is like people are essentially what you're doing. If you're looking at a storefront, right, then you're just saying, what does my game look like? And then within the genre that I'm in, what do games that look like the game that I have typically go for? And then my 2 cents is that you always pick the highest number in that you can stomach.
Because again, that's and you will if you can find a price point that's high. If you have a high quality game that's a price point that's high in your market pocket, right? Then that will probably bring the game to the most people because economics don't apply here, right? It's not supply. It's not as price goes down, demand goes up. It's as price goes up, demand goes up to a point. Yep. And so if you want lots of people to experience your game, you have to charge the most you can for it. Yeah. So that people view it as a high quality thing that they want.
But it's very strange. The can though, and the can is important.
Yeah.
Right. That's where all the
Which is also why, for example, we launched Crashlands at $15 on Steam and $5 on mobile because a high quality mobile game is $5. Yeah. Like a high quality indie mobile game. There were at the time games like XCOM and stuff that came out like on iPad for $20, and that was a scandal, by the way. A AAA game coming out for $20 on iPad. Same game as it is on desktop. Yeah, but the fact that it's on an iPad makes it suddenly 1/3 the price just because, again, that's where it lives in the market. It's nothing to do with the game.
Price is imaginary. It's just what people will pay. And also to go back to the idea of like, it's not that it doesn't follow economics. It's that economics doesn't apply to anything, actually. Like the basic rules that you see in like Econ 101 kind of stuff.
Economics ignores psychology in most.
Because economics assumes that price is the only thing people act on, which everybody knows is not true.
Well, price and utility, which is a made-up economics thing that doesn't exist.
I think they use that to try to compensate for the fact that price is insufficient and try to capture everything else in that, but you can't. It's way more complicated. And we've talked about this in the past too, and we've done like sales experiments and stuff, right? And find that like the more on sale you go for games, the less money you make actually up to a point, and all of a sudden you make way more. But it's actually because what really matters is people being able to see it, not really its price exactly. And then also what's
basically all of the levers here just get all tangly, right? Yeah. So I think your best strat is, but again, you can't overprice it. Because then you have basically a promise problem. And I want to talk about Vampire Survivors, okay? Because I feel like this can come up, okay? Because that fucking game sold for $5 on Steam, right? So you might say, hey, could they have maybe asked for $10? Nope. But if you look at it, again, just look at it. No, you could not ask for more than $5. And that's the easy answer.
And that was probably the highest price point they could justify to get people through the door.
Yes, because you still need to get people through the door. And so,
but it's also remarkable. I think it's an interesting case study. Also, because you have to always be careful with any case study too about how representative it is, right? But I think from a price point of like saying like, oh yeah, like it wouldn't have been able to price more. I think that's true. I think now it could because now it already has cultural weight
because people know what it is. Yes,
yeah. But I think to me the interesting thing is that it got even at the $5 price point that it got kicked off at all because like we're saying a $5 price point is an indicator to the audience of low quality, right? But it doesn't mean that it is. That means that's what the person viewing it interprets it as. Like if I see a $3 game on Steam, I ignore it. The price alone makes me not look further because I'm like.
But the weird thing is like because like that's close to $5, but $5 basically says, hey, this is one of the best low quality games you can buy.
Yeah. Right? Honestly, I still wouldn't look at it, but it's way more likely I would look at it. But to me, the interesting thing is that enough people looked at it at $5 and were like, and weren't immediately thrown off by the price point of being like, this is too low to be a good game.
But it's because the graphics matched. It looked like a $5. I don't know how to put it. It looked like a $5 game.
But it had to also look like a $5 game you wanted to try.
Well, that's what I mean. That's not to say that $5 games are not. It's not necessarily the case that a $5 game is bad. I think it's
no, it's not. But it's a hard sell. Just because it's cheap doesn't mean people are going to get it. Yeah.
But I think what you've seen since though is there's now a bunch more Survivors style games so like that whole genre basically kicked off that are higher production value and they do charge more. There's $10 ones. There's like $15 ones.
But they're still cheap.
Because it's not about the gameplay. Cheap, right? It's just about what it looks like.
Yeah. Because the visuals were so I think that's the interesting note on like how to kind of find the range. And the reason you pick the highest from all the stuff we talked about is on top of that, the sales problem, which is that your game is actually going to be on sale a lot. Just all the fucking time. Like once you get past the first, 6 months or so of like minimal promotion, or depending on how you do it. The game's just going to be on sale kind of forever. And so the reality
basically
is that, like,
all of your future revenue after launch comes from sales, just
Yes.
proportionally.
yeah. And so you have that combo too, where it's like, okay, that means that let's say you could price the game at either, let's say it's like your first indie game, it like looks all right, and you like think basically $15 is like the absolute most that you could like get away with. So you park it there, like $15. Okay, sure. Now when you do sales and stuff like that for 30% off, which is like, a fucking lot, when you also have to give Valve 30% of the money you get too, then you're still actually making some money off it. Versus if you're like, oh, I don't want to, like, I want more people to play it. I don't want to like offend anybody by asking for, I don't know, I'm just going to ask for $10 for this game. Like I said, probably less people buy it because they'd be like, oh, I guess it can't be that good if they're only selling it for $10. And then you're going to get the sales problem, which is now for the rest of the time, you're severely nuking the amount of money you make, right?
Yeah. So somehow $10 is a no man's land, I feel like.
I think it's got to be, it's because
it doesn't feel like it has an opinion.
Yes.
Yeah. Because if it's $5, it's like, well, like, this is a cheap game, but like it's still $5, so it's not like dirt cheap.
Yeah.
So
if it's $10, it feels
decent.
like you liked the number 10. It doesn't feel like it has any relationship.
I think $10 is a coward's price. I'm gonna say it.
It is, and we found that out when like everybody agrees with that sentiment because when we priced our game at $10, they were like, these weenies,
right? Because I think they
don't believe in this game.
Well, I think it's your price, because I think you're pricing it in a vacuum. It's not about the game. It's basically you saying like I'm not comfortable saying my game is only worth $5 is what you're saying, right?
Yes,
but I'm also
definitely not comfortable with it being
definitely not comfortable with being $50.
Yeah, so
I'm gonna just pick a number that feels like people would be okay with it.
Yeah,
it feels like it's about everybody else.
This is like you can play this game a little bit too. Like if you're trying to price it, instead of trying to find the number, you basically ask the same question, which is like, okay, if I were to price it at say $15, how would I feel if say I suggested that price to Steam and they're like, actually your game's $10, right? Would I be like, that's not correct. Like there's a lot more stuff in there. You know what I mean? Like you play a few of these little thought experiment games. Mm-hmm. Or if they were like, actually, you need to sell this for like $20. Would you be like, I feel like that's making some promises that I am not going to be able to back up. You know what I mean? Like, is that too much?
Yeah. I would say the best way to think about this is, so one of the terms that people use when talking about gaming is theory crafting, right? Mm-hmm. Which is like running all these simulations and like crunching the numbers and trying to figure out best ways to play a game, right? And you can try to do some theory crafting about pricing, but ultimately what you really need to do is feely crafting.
Yep.
Which is you got to just feel out the sentiment of the market, of the players, of your own gut, know? And then you got to be bold and commit.
Yeah, and there's no right answer.
There's just no right answer.
There's no way to find out if you chose quote unquote the right thing. The right thing could, but also depends on your goals and so on, right? But because the only way to find that out would be to split the universe and do different things on each branch of the universe and see what the outcome was that was better. Because once the game's once it's out, that's the defining moment. That's like, it just is what it is from that point forward. And you might look at it and be like, oh fuck, if I charged $5 more on that game, I don't think it would have hurt sales at all. And now I'd have 20% more money, right? And that's kind of that's the downside of the choice at the end of it is no matter what you do, it's not going to be the case that you will end up being confident you threaded the needle perfectly and that you didn't lose or come out worse or come out ahead, right? And you're trying. I think so much what we're trying to do is avoid being filled with regret on the other side of launching the game.
So I think for me, it's like, will Crashlands 2 be $15? No, it's going to be more than $15,
and it definitely won't be 10.
It definitely won't be 10. Yeah, that's also 15, so we're a safety there.
Yeah. Will it be more than $40?
No, absolutely not.
No.
So probably crazy. Somewhere between 20
and 30.
30.
Somewhere in
depending on where things are at.
Well, because even
look around. I haven't looked around recently, so
yeah, we've looked around, but without even without setting a price because we don't want to play that game right now, right? But like, if we just kind of think through, like, what when we're talking about like Crashlands 2, like what's pushing us towards like 20 or towards 30 or pushing away, right? So like $40, like a 2D kind of like that doesn't happen. You don't sell games for $40 at that price. It doesn't make
2D
any sense,
games
right?
are very hard to sell at 40.
Correct.
Yeah. And actually $20, if you're looking at like also that same kind of genre, like that's also honestly kind of a hard sell, like for that subset of the market, right? On the other hand, games have become more expensive recently because they have to, because everything is, right? So the kind of price point is actually kind of drifting up a bit for what these things go for. For like a really solid indie title, typically these days you're looking at $20 to $30, right?
Yep.
And so we're trying to use the price as to like indicate, hey, this is a really solid indie title is what we're trying to do, right? But also we have original Crashlands as a point of comparison, right? And the users or the players who have original Crashlands are one of our core target audiences for Crashlands 2. So the price of Crashlands 2 has to feel like it makes sense proportionally to what they paid for Crashlands 1, right? And so not what they paid, sorry, what it's priced at, because that's an important distinction.
Right.
So if they're saying like Crashlands was $15 game, and if somebody like Crashlands, they're gonna be like, okay, that makes sense, right? So if Crashlands 2 is, when they're looking at it and they're doing their evaluations, they're like, well, it is twice as good.
That's what I'm saying. 2x,
$30. There you go. Done. Right. Can we convince people that that's true and have them think about things in that way? Because that's not the only way people think about it. That's the problem.
Absolutely not. Yeah. Also, you're not just selling to people who played the original one.
But you're also selling to new people. Yeah.
The goal is,
and
to
honestly,
audience, right?
it's 4 times as good because it is twice the resolution of the original.
Yeah,
which is 4 times the pixels. So
if
and
the
it's
way
gonna
the industry
have-
works has taught us anything.
And it's going to have probably 4 times the amount of the duration of experience.
Frankly,
Possibly.
Exactly.
probably.
So I guess it's a $60 game is what I'm saying.
Yeah.
Just
yeah.
multiply it.
Just by the numbers, dollar. We need to keep the dollars per hour of experience similar.
Yeah.
Because again, that's how games work.
Yeah. So, which is all to say, like, we don't have an answer yet. And before we settle on one, we're going to have to do what we always do, which is at the point we finally have to make a decision. Like Sam said, we're going to go look in the market and see what are games going for. What are the popular games going for? What are the unpopular games going for? Or how did the games that price stuff at that same price point do? Did many do surprisingly worse? And do we think that's because there's a price point problem here and like just some lucky games got away with a higher price point or whatever? We just have to kind of do a lot of fuzzy guessing.
Feely craft.
Come up with a number and then just hope we didn't completely fuck our launch. But that's really the best we can do.
Fingers crossed.
So I know that doesn't answer your question.
Yeah.
But
Unfortunately, if
it's
somebody
like,
tells you there's an answer to this, don't walk away. That person is not trustworthy because you can't know. You cannot.
And you can't launch.
know.
You can't launch the same game at 2 different prices on the same day and see which one does better.
Also, I will say, do not ask players how much the game should cost.
Absolutely not. No, do not do that.
Do not. The answers you get will be unsurprising, which will be, how come it's not free? That's always the question. And then if it is free, how come it's monetized at all? So don't worry about it. Don't worry about it. The common
Even if they're trying to be honest, even if they're trying not to only think about that they want it to be free, what they say they're going to, it's like an exit poll, right? That's like, how do you, even something as fundamental as like, hey, you got 2 insanely different binary choices in an election, right? If you ask a person who they're going to vote for before they go do it, it's kind of uncorrelated, it turns out. You would think something that simple could be.
Did you make up your mind before that? No, apparently not.
Apparently
I'm gonna fucking wing it.
Because like that day of the election, you had a weird burrito for breakfast, and it kind of hit you funny, and whoops.
Yep. Whoops.
Wow.
Checked a different box than you intended to.
I think it's more important to
just
look
have to
at
pick.
the market.
Yes.
And be, again, what does my game look like? What's the genre? And just use that. Kind of make a little scatter plot if you want.
Yeah, it does require you to critically and honestly evaluate like how somebody else would perceive your game. And I think one of the problems in the indie space is that actually it just goes both ways, but in all spaces, but particularly in the indie space, is that people tend to either really overinflate, but more usually they tend to devalue the thing that they've made. And so if you
that is a knock-on consequence too.
Yeah, because it brings the whole market cost down for indie titles.
Well, no, but also for that game specifically, reducing the barrier to entry. So this is kind of like we talked about the Apple Vision Pro a couple weeks back, where they're selling that fucking thing at $3,500 base, right? And then with other peripherals and stuff, you're basically like taking out a second mortgage to get this thing. The only people buying this thing are people who really, really want it.
Yep.
So the people who are talking about their experiences with it, making YouTube videos or whatever, they'll largely have positive things to say, because buyer's remorse is painful, and people will try to find ways to, justify their purchase or whatever.
But even if they're not doing that, they didn't buy it on a whim, right? They did their research. They thought about it carefully. They decided to buy it and so on. So even if they turn out to not like it, it'll still be a thoughtful, they're an informed person who got it in the first place, right?
Now, if a Vision Pro was $9, okay,
I'd buy one. I don't even have. I'd
buy one just to. I have no interest in it.
Yeah, zero.
But it's so cheap at that point. I'm like, maybe I'm wrong, And
then I would get it, and I would hate it, and I would write so many bad reviews.
Right, and so by reducing that barrier to entry, you bring people into the door who actually have no business being there, right?
Yes.
Because they didn't want to be there to begin with, but they're just kind of curious. And then they will say negative things about it because the thing isn't for them.
Yeah.
But you've lowered the barrier enough that they just walked right in, right? And so that's another weird thing that you got to think about with, like, if you devalue your own game price-wise, then you also suppress the public perception of the game, because you've widened the user base to a point where it's the wrong people are playing it now, and it's going to be poorly reviewed.
So I do think one of the most impressive things is a game that is around $5 or $10 that has something like overwhelmingly positive reviews.
Oh yeah, truly,
that's
amazing.
a banger. That's a banger.
It's going to be fucking good because it's like because everybody can play it because it's so cheap. It's crazy, right?
Yeah.
So
or a game where there's a strong disconnect between what it looks like it should be priced at and what it is priced at in a positive direction, and it's like way more expensive.
Yes.
And it has RimWorld. Yeah, to me, RimWorld is the core example. Yeah, exactly. Every time I saw RimWorld, until I think it was Seth finally, who was like, everybody just absolutely has to play this game. But every time I'd seen it pop up, I would just look at it and be like, why is this $30? And then I would move on.
It had like 100,000 reviews.
Yeah.
And I was like,
and it is like 98.5% positive.
Yeah.
And for me, it was the same. Where like that game was in early access for like 3 years or 4 years by the time I played it. And it had something like 20,000 reviews at that point. And like I had seen it and I had seen people talking about it and whatever, but it just didn't really strike me as making sense.
Because how would it?
How would
I mean, look at it.
And then it hit a certain threshold where it's just like, you know what? I'm in the wrong.
Yeah.
Like,
I think what
this
it
many
is
people say this is good,
is that paying attention to the contrast between those two things.
Yeah.
Right? This thing looks terrible,
But
and it's
apparently
priced
it's
kind of
amazing.
high, which confuses the shit out of me. And everyone's enthused.
Yeah.
It's like that's a very good signal, actually. But the signal is not the two pieces.
That is a good way, I think. Yeah, I think Sam, it's a good way to pick a game is to look for the places where you would think that the mismatch or just the fact that it's a really low price, because that's already a surprise.
Yep.
So either the fact that it's a low price or there's a strong mismatch between what you perceive the price should be and what it is.
Yes.
And yet large numbers of people have positively reviewed it.
Yep.
I think anytime you see a game in that category, if you're into games, if you just like to play stuff, right, just get it. You're gonna have a good time.
Probably make a good time. Yeah.
Yep.
it's going to be good.
Yeah.
So yeah, I don't know. That's how you price games. It's just
guess. Yeah, we did at the end of our playtest for Crashlands 2 back in November, whenever that was, just for fun. Because again, you don't want to ask your players how much the game should be and then actually use that information. But just for fun, I just wanted to get a sense of what people would say if I asked about Crashlands 2. So I had a little exit interview.
We did do this question. Yeah.
So I asked, not to use it, but just because I wanted to see what people would say, And I saw basically what I was actually largely pleased because people weren't. I think I had an option there that was just like essentially free, $10 or whatever, right? And I was pleased that nobody picked that out of like 30 respondents or something like that. But then what people did pick just varied along the whole fucking range, because and just for fun, I was like also $40, even though like we're not going to put Crashlands 2 $40 probably. But a handful of people picked that too, right? It's because the experience they had playing the game, they were like, yeah, I could see like if I had paid $40 for this, it would feel worth it, right?
But
Would
that's
that
the thing.
person have paid $40 to try it out?
Up front? Fuck no.
Yeah, because they don't know that it's that good.
Yep.
Oh, if they haven't bought it. Yeah.
Yeah,
So
and
again,
you can play the same game with like any game that you really like, right? Like if you like any of the like if take any of your favorite games and ask like how much, knowing what you know now, how much would you be willing to pay for it if you got to like if you had to do it again and it's got to start it from fresh enough? Like any game you pick, I would imagine you'd be like almost any amount I could afford is the actual answer, right? Like if I were to be able to like replay Subnautica again, which was what a $40 game or something, like I'd pay $100 for that experience. It's fucking amazing. One of the best.
But
One of the best
because you
experiences I've
know
ever had
exactly
playing
what it
video games.
is, right?
Yeah.
yeah. This is what's interesting about a game like WoW, which I've been subscribing to for nearly 20 years. Still at like $13 a month, right? It's like I paid like thousands of dollars to
thousands
play
of
this
thousands,
game.
Yeah.
But also, it's just every 6 months, basically, I just get to reevaluate whether it has been worth it up to this point and whether I want to, purchase another 6 months. And sometimes
Sometimes you don't.
sometimes it's less good, and I have taken breaks.
And sometimes you're kind of mad about the fact that you're still willing to pay for it, right?
Yeah, because sometimes it's like there's enough good things in it, and my friends are playing it, and blah blah, and it's still fun enough. But like this, they've added some jank to it, where I'm like, ugh, all right, and I'll pony up the cash, But again, like that's a very different decision making metric because I've been playing this game for 20 years.
Yeah.
It's not like I don't know what I'm getting into, right? So,
yeah, but I think that's the reason why. Yeah, if you ask people after they've played your game what the price will be, again, you can't actually use that.
Can't use it. Yep.
Can't use it because it's
just
like
can't.
it's that's a different question at that point. That's not how the market's reacting on it from screenshots.
Totally different.
Yep.
Shit.
Because you're selling the game to people who don't have it. So
yep.
you got to play. You got to
That's
play this
typical,
horrible game
Yeah.
of just guessing what is going to be fine, and then knowing that in the end nobody's happy about paying for things, right? So
People want their money, and you want their money, and
well, that's how money works.
no, you can't have it both
you
ways.
just have to
I
accept.
think people are typically very happy about paying for things after they've been able to experience it and it was good.
Yeah, if they feel like they got
fact-
their money's worth the other side of it. Yeah.
Exactly. Oftentimes they'll pay a lot more after that. That's the whole microtransactions approach, right? But
Yep.
upfront it's hard. So you do your best. We'll be cheering for you.
And also,
Which is also
just
an
as a-
argument for trying to move some of the payment after the initial purchase for games where you can be highly confident that players are going to come in and be like, wow, I'd spend almost any amount of money on this thing, right? That's where.
Throw some DLCs in there. Price them reasonably, give people good stuff that they want, and which like we haven't done DLCs yet, but I don't know.
Good.
It's not off the table
Sounds
for
like a good
Crashlands 2
plan.
if things go well, All right, next question comes from Captain Jazz, who says, one of the most common perspectives I hear regarding starting a business is to not work with family. Why do you guys believe it works well for you?
Before we
you
get
have to
into
ask.
our own case,
Yeah.
I will say this is good advice. Friends and family,
Yes.
be extremely careful about going into business with.
When someone says they're a family company, also squint very hard.
Suspicious.
Because similar to when people ask or basically give this advice, the problem is when you're using the word family. What do you mean, right? What are you talking about? Because I think under the typical use case, the reason it makes sense why that is a bad idea is because typically families are very complex systems. You got a lot of personalities locked together for a long time. There's a lot of challenges in terms of how do people communicate with each other? How effective are they at resolving conflict, like within and among themselves? How long do they allow problems to, like, say, fester before, bringing them up? That sort of thing.
Yeah. And for friends and family, you have a lot of external factors involved with allowing miscommunication and festering problems and that kind of stuff to just persist, right?
Yes.
Which in the context of trying to accomplish something together as a team, which I would argue is also what like family units and friend units should be trying to do too, right? Yep. But that's not, people don't really think about stuff in that way. But in the context of like trying to accomplish something where there's now risk, where now people have put money in, they're putting time in, you've got employees, like all that kind of stuff is happening. That kind of stuff becomes a real problem. And so I think to me, like that kind of, it just boils down to that it's too easy in a family and friend context for things to just be unresolved so that the people involved have never had to learn how to do that with each other. Yeah. And a business can't survive with that.
Well, there's also a couple of other dimensions to this, which is why do people work with family,
Yeah.
And oftentimes it's just out of convenience.
Yeah.
Right? Like you and your cousin are just like, hey, we both like cars. Let's start up an auto repair shop.
Yeah. Because
Or
you need
whatever, right?
somebody.
You need somebody.
Yep.
Now, did you vet that person? Did you
Well, I've known him for
check their
15
resume?
years. So yeah, of course.
No, you did not, right? Just because you've been around them a bunch doesn't mean you actually understand what they're capable of in a professional setting. And so I think that oftentimes issues with this is it's the reason there's a word for it, which is nepotism, right? Which is like giving a family member basically a free pass into getting work at a company or
Independent
a role
of their
independent
skill,
of their
knowledge,
skills, right?
Yep.
And it's like that's oftentimes how people end up working together as family. And then you have the knock-on problem, which is once you discover that this family member can't do the things that you need them to do, or vice versa, they discover that you can't do the things they needed you to do. Somebody's got to get fired.
Yeah, because now the cost of breaking the relationship in the business context can also be the relationship outside the business context, which also means, again, the problems just stay there because the cost seems too high to deal with it. And so,
I think the way to tackle it, and the reason why I think it's worked for us is because Butterscotch is not the first time that we've worked together at all. Right. So one is that, I mean, in a simpler way, growing up, we did all sorts of, there were like tons of chores and also just projects and stuff that we did as a little weird, ragtag crew doing stuff. So you got, and again, that's not much, but it's something. But then I think it was before we were out of college. Yeah, before we were out of college, though. Like, so Seth and I worked at a grocery store. We worked at the same grocery store and sometimes worked the same shifts. So, like, we worked around each other.
We worked with each other.
Yeah, we worked with each other. And then I think in college, or maybe right after college for you guys, we had that, like, custom computer parts company for summer.
We started up. We tried to start up a company. It was
Mindforge. Yeah.
It was a bunch of bad ideas, but we learned a lot. We
learned a lot.
It was very interesting.
And it was time limited. It was like a 3-month thing, Like
let's see what we can do in 3 months, and if it goes, it goes, and if not, oh well, we'll all go back to school. And it didn't go, and then we all went back to school.
Yep. Yeah. And then later, Seth and I did game jams together a few times.
Yeah, and then we worked at Simutronics for 8 months together.
We worked somewhere else together, right?
Yeah. So we had been seeing each other in some kind of a team, like task-oriented, goal-oriented environments, whether it was working together at simpler places, growing up, doing all this, like taking care of all this stuff that we had to do around the house.
There's two factors to that too, right? Because one is it gives you an opportunity to evaluate what it's like to work with each other, right?
Yes.
Which is the less active thing. And the other one that it does is allows you to adapt to and like learn how to work with each other.
Yes.
Right? And
which is also a very big point.
You got to do both of those because otherwise, if you just see that you're like, oh, this person sucks and that's the end of it, right? Or this person seems great and that's the end of it. Either way, if there's no adaptive process, if there's no like actual communication going on. And to me, though, it's not even really about like the family thing. It's actually, I think, kind of, as you guys are saying, like family business tend to happen out of convenience, independent of actually the relationships, the real relationships, and like who the people are and stuff. But what matters the most for running a business together is shared values and common ways of thinking about work and work ethic, right? And shared goals that are not competing, right? Because if one of the three of us was a money-motivated person first, this wouldn't work. Just wouldn't work. That's two cross purposes with all three of us are not, right? So if one of us suddenly wasn't, then that would be a problem, right? Mm-hmm. And just because you're family or just because you're friends doesn't mean you're aligned on any of those dimensions, right? In fact, it's uncorrelated. Those aren't really things.
But I think the adaptive part to me is actually one of the biggest ones, which is I think there's a lot of this like, I think a lot of people, whether they realize it or not, harbor some idea of this thing that like, whether it's with your partner, basically with someone who's supposed to love you, right? Family, friends, romantic partner. There's this idea that like they should take you
how you are. Yeah.
And I'm just going to say it. That's fucked up. Okay.
Yeah. You're not good enough.
You're not good enough
to just be in all scenarios, be accepted face value with no changes.
Yes. But it's how you, because I think the problem is we're lumping two things. Are people, you're not trying to, but people lump two things together. One is like just what it actually means to be a person, like your actual real traits and stuff. And the other one is what it means to have relationships and interactions with other people, right? And that's the dimension along which, that second one, that you should never treat as fixed. That's a thing that you're negotiating constantly with the people that you're in relationships with, is like, how do we act towards each other, right?
But even the case of
give
like,
each other
you know,
feedback. And,
can you talk to this person and trust that if you bring up an issue that they're going to listen to it and try to come to a solution, even if that means looking in the mirror and being like, I am the problem? Because if the answer is no, you absolutely should not be starting a business together. You know, should you be romantic partners? I don't think so. Because that sounds like you're not going to be able to get further than whatever the first incident is, right? So it's like, if you cannot have those conversations, that to me is the bedrock of all these things. And the reality is that we've been able to have those conversations. I don't know why.
But the other sort of nuance there too, though, is that just so people aren't getting the wrong idea, you know, is that also knowing that you yourself, you don't get to decide how other people are supposed to be, right? So it's not a matter of being like, oh yeah, like everybody should be change, everybody should change, everybody should be willing to change, etc. That's usually presented as like other people's problem, you know what I mean? Where it's like, where other people not adapting to you, right?
Yeah,
sometimes you are the problem. Also,
and I would actually say that most of the time, everybody's the problem, right?
Yeah,
that's usually the reality of like a good relationship is actually coming at it with that, which is like, there's this thing that maybe you did that is like aggravating me. Can we talk about it? And like, what does that mean? Is this
but also acknowledging that might be a you thing, and like start there. That's the better place to start, right? And again, like it's not about change the person or whatever. It's about understanding how do you become more effective. Understanding which parts are actually just fundamental, right? Like just parts of being a person, right? And which parts are just dynamic things that come from relationships between people and being able to deal with it mostly at that level, because that's actually the level that allows you to accomplish stuff together, right?
Yeah, I think one of the tenets that, like, you know, my wife and I talk about a lot is the idea that doing hard things and kind of like having a bad time while you're doing it is not particularly uncommon, right? Like that's kind of the mode typically, where it's like, I struggled through this, it was terrible. Look at this like thing I did, that was great. Could you like, we asked the question like, okay, if we're having a hard time with something that is hard, because it is objectively hard. We have a baby, right? It's a hard thing, parenting, having a baby. Can you have a good time while you're doing a hard thing? Because again, it's not particularly impressive to be soldiering through. I mean, it's impressive in a different angle, but not the one that I care about, which is like, is the relationship effective enough to manage that kind of a payload in terms of stress, responsibility?
Which is more just not it's more just, I think, not stopping at, because like things might just stay hard. That's possible too, right? But you're not stopping at,
do I have to have a bad time because things are hard?
Yeah, you're still trying to find ways
to, hard.
Yeah, you're still trying to find ways to improve it, trying to find ways to commiserate about the fact that things are hard, not just stop at like it's hard, and certainly not stop at it's hard and it's your fault. You know, so
yes,
person, right?
You know,
it's got to. The whole thing has to be a team experience, is the short of it, right?
I'm gonna flip this around. I'm gonna say you should work with family, whatever possible.
Okay, go.
Depends on your family.
So here's the thing.
Big asterisk.
The reasons that we're all talking about come down to people being bad at taking feedback, bad at communicating,
trust also,
and just bad at trust, bad at operating in any context where they need to maintain team-oriented relationships over a long period of time, right? And that will happen in your workplace, whether you are a family or not. The difference is, if you don't have to go home to that person or see them outside of the work context, you can ignore it much more easily and not deal with the fact that you suck at this.
Bring your work home with you so that you make your work
you can work on it
more like home.
Yeah.
Yeah, because for a family context where it's important to you to maintain that relationship.
Yes, if there's somebody in your family who you can't stand, yes, obviously don't work with that person.
It's just an important nuance. It's just some people just do suck. That's
some people
true.
just suck, and
some of them are your family members. That's true.
And that's
I'm not saying any of our family members are. I love all my family members. It's not, but
I'm saying that's why we come back to this idea of capacity for change and ability to listen, right? Like, you could tell if someone, like, I don't know, doesn't give a shit enough about anything you say to them. Obviously not a good.
And you can't. And if that person is family or not, don't hire them.
Exactly. It doesn't matter.
Yes.
Yeah.
If somebody is a good listener, good at communicating, can take feedback, is adaptable, and so are you, then work together.
Yeah. It's basically, does someone happen to be family, and that's who you're working with? Because that's kind of where in my opinion, like we are, right? Is like there, which isn't like fully right, because also the fact that we grew up together and like it is why we work well together, right? Because which again doesn't have to be the outcome, but that
Because
that
it could
is
also
why.
just be
It could go the
reason
other
why we
way.
don't work well together.
But in our case it is, right? Because we have the shared foundation, which I think to me more important than anything is we have our
very
core
aligned.
shared values that we're aligned on are the importance of hard work, the importance of doing good work, and the importance of taking one for the team, right? And trying to figure and because we all believe in those three sort of principles completely, then we don't have to fight on those dimensions, which are the hardest dimensions that you need to make everybody feel like things are fair and like, and everyone's putting in their all and everyone's accomplishing useful things, right? That's why we ended up there. But
Yeah.
but also it's not a requirement. There's tons of other people who have the same sets of values, right? In fact, we've hired some of them, right? So, or married some of them and then hired them or whatever, right? Like it's
We haven't done it the other direction, but yeah.
and won't. That's really appropriate.
Yeah, we won't. Yeah.
Yeah, but the point being, like, you can think of it in two ways. You can think of it as like we happen to be family, right? Or because we're family, or because we're not, or whatever, right? But it's basically, is it causative or does it just happen to be the case? And I think so many family and friend like workplace dynamics are there's basically it's in the because category or even in the in spite of category, right?
I think the assessment is useful to ask the question: if this happened to be your coworkers, right? Would you continue in this way? Would you continue working with these people? Would this be good, right?
Yeah. Or are you only
Because-
doing it because it's family?
Yeah, because I think as long as you can keep it in that, because I think that's where all of us are square at, which is like I feel like we made a really good thing together, and we managed to make it so we all enjoy working with each other and the people in our company and whatever. Means that if you guys were just two random people, I would still do it, right?
Yeah.
Yeah.
So
Yeah. Because again, this comes down to like, for example, there's conventional wisdom that marriage is hard. It is wrong.
yes,
Yeah.
It is just completely wrong.
It can
Marriage-
be, and often is, but it's not an inherent property.
It can be, but marriage is a piece of paper that the two of you have signed.
Yeah.
It's a contract, right?
It's disconnected from the concept of a relationship, actually.
Yeah. So what you really say, if you think marriages are hard, what you're saying is
Long-term
relationships are hard, which
is
means which basically what you're saying is like, anytime I've been with another person for a long period of time, it was hard for me. Well, maybe look in the mirror, you know?
Also, like, what does it mean? What do you say that? Like, do you just mean it requires a lot of work? Because that's true. You know,
It
like
can
starting a business
require
requires fun.
varying amounts of work, right? But it's like what kind of work and what are the stakes, right? Like if it feels like you're like constantly on the verge of having your marriage fall apart, right? And that's been true
or
of
wanting it to.
right. And like if that's been true of all of your relationships, then marriage is not what's going on here. Marriage is not the problem. You are the problem, right? In the same way that like working with family it's just working with people.
Well, I'd say you're not necessarily the problem, but you have to recognize that you are part of the problem because this is all
Part of the problem.
systems. Diana and I my wife and I talk about this a lot, where it's like if we have an argument about something or we're trying to figure out kind of what's going on, there is always this question, which is okay, what role am I playing in this? Even if the thing is a thing that like I'm mad about, for example, or like I had a bad time with, how is there a place where systemic?
Are you there as a team-based problem solver, right? Or are you there?
So I'm trying to look at this from a higher level and be like, okay, what am I doing to possibly, do this? And again, like you can't actually do that if you don't trust the other person, right? Because I've been had a very abusive relationship in the past. And you can't ask that question to someone who's an abuser because they don't give you the actual fucking team-based answer, which is, let me think about that for a sec. They, just heap all the stuff on you. So that's why this is all, and Adam's point, there's infinite nuance here.
It's actually
which I think
not
should be
about
clear.
family versus not family, right? It's actually about the shapes of your relationships.
Yes.
And for most people, unfortunately, family is the place where where everybody's allowed to have a bad relationship, right?
Yes.
Because in all other contexts, it's just expected that if you have a friend who's mean to you, that you just stop being friends with them, right? But it's not culturally accepted, although fortunately it's becoming more so, that if you have a family member who's just mean to you, that you can cut them out, right? And
Or tell them, hey, if you don't quit being such a
draw a
dick,
boundary of some sort. Yeah.
then we're not going to hang out. And then let them decide if they're cut out, you know. There's always like, there's all the ways for slicing these things, but it's like the point is.
But the point is we let, culturally speaking, we let family relationships be bad. And that is why in a work context, if you're working with your family and culturally we let family relationships be bad, you can't
also
have
let
a
work
good
relationships be bad.
Yeah.
Think about
We also do that
all
too.
the jokes,
All of them,
about management and stuff. And it's like,
That's true.
Again, I'm not impressed if you can like do a hard thing and have a hard time. If you can like
Suffer through.
It's just not, it's so boring. Like,
I'm impressed if you can make a hard thing easy,
yeah. Or just not even easy, but just enjoyable.
manageable, doable,
Yeah.
satisfying,
Sustainable.
How can we have a good time while we're doing this bullshit? Right. And it's just a much more enjoyable question.
You should be fighting the world together, not each other. You know? That's what it comes down to, really.
Yeah, honestly, I do remember like our parents had that saying that they would something like that where like when we were growing up talking about like being in a relationship is being on a team where you're both working together to solve the same problem. So it's like it's the two of you against the world, right?
The world's fucked up. It really should be you against the world, you know?
Even if the world was great, there's a lot, honestly. It's just
There's a lot going on.
Yeah. And so, so if you are frequently getting in fights with your significant other, where you or they are constantly like bringing things up to like emotionally sabotage each other, make each other feel guilty, blah, blah, blah. That's why it's hard for you. That's why you're having a bad time, right? It's because you're not actually
or if you're
working.
just not contributing because
because you're not working together.
Yeah.
To solve problems, right? So again, like just as a corollary to that, like it doesn't feel much different to be like working with my brothers and working with my wife in this studio as it is to be in a marriage, right? Which is like it's just a team that I'm on, and we're solving problems together, right? That's how I try to operate in any context where
why you're
find
trying to
myself.
solve problems together is the thing that differs, right? Between like
and like
any
the,
given relationship,
and the
right?
structure, like what kinds of problems you're solving, right?
Yeah.
So like the kinds of problems that like my wife and I solve in our household are different than the problems that I solve with my brothers in the studio.
Yeah. But the shared thing is that in all cases, you're just solving problems as a team.
Yeah. So I'm coming into that environment thinking, okay, what do these people need from me? What problems are we trying to solve? What are they doing? And what can I do to help? And if I don't know, how do I talk about that? How do we align ourselves? Right. And if you approach your relationships, your work, if you approach all these things in that way, and so do the people around you,
that's the tricky part.
then it's all pretty easy.
Yeah.
Right. So,
Or not easy, but which is like not that it's easy, it's that it's doable and manageable.
It's enjoyable. It's actually good.
And even enjoyable. Yeah.
Let me rephrase. It's hard for the right reasons, which is that the problems you're solving are hard.
Yeah.
You are not each other's problems.
Yeah. That's what I always, that's the thing for me when people always say things are hard, whether it's like a marriage context or working with family, whatever. When you use the word hard, you never know what it's
what does that mean?
Dumb of a word. Yeah. Cause it's like, it is true that just being with a person for a very long amount of time is hard. If by hard you mean requires that you are essentially in constant
that you do something
communication. Yeah, with that person to make sure everyone's on the same page, right? That it is hard in that regard, but
in the sense that there's work involved, right?
Yes,
not non-pejoratively necessarily.
When I talk about it as being easy, I'm talking about relatively, because in my mind, all the things that I'm doing with my work and my home relationships, whatever, all those things would be infinitely harder if I didn't have those people with me.
Yeah.
Right. So like,
that's also a good metric, right? Yeah.
For me, I just say like being married is easy because not being married would be really fucking hard because I wouldn't have this great person with me to help me get through things in life. Right.
Yeah.
And so same thing with working here. Right. It's easy in the sense that compared to the alternative.
Yeah.
So actually, I think actually just easier is the better one, right? Because
it's so much
easy.
Right.
It's that if you look at the alternative, it's easier. And I think the other part of all this too is it's the explicit versus implicit and like the deal with expectations, right? And as Sam said, really it's all about communication. And if you can communicate really effectively with somebody, however they're related to you, then
you got to talk constantly.
That's what provides the option. Because even think of even just simple stuff like as we put the business together, and then like we turned it from an LC into an S corp, we always have to have these discussions about explicit discussions about who owns what, right? Who owns what? Who's in charge? Who's whatever, right? And what does this stuff mean? And in a lot of contexts, family or not, and you see this constantly in like the indie game scene where people are like. Find some buddies, do a game jam, like, ooh, let's start a business, right?
Didn't make any bylaws, didn't decide anything up front.
And so here we are, like three siblings who've known each other forever, are on the same page, don't really worry about alignment problems and so on. But we still sat down for several hours when we converted to an S corp, and we're like, what happens if one of us dies, or what happens if one of us?
Didn't we just update this like 2 years ago? We like revisited the bylaws.
It was it was just a few years ago. Or what happens if one of us just goes nuts? That happens.
Yeah.
What happens if one of us turns into an asshole? That also happens, right? And acknowledging that, like, could be me. It doesn't have to, like,
Could be.
You don't have to pick somebody and be like, I'm afraid that person's going to be an, because it doesn't matter who it is, right? The question is just, what happens if? And if you can't sit down and work through all those and do it explicitly, so everybody, because that's how you discover you're in alignment.
I think about it like death. Okay, now hear me out.
Okay,
Because the thing is, there's a lot of things that people are very afraid to really just look at and sit with,
because they don't
want
want
those
the answers.
Yeah, because it's like it's by exploring the answers you are essentially confronting it, right? In a way that feels like maybe I don't ever have to confront this if we never talk about it, if we never look at it, whatever, right? And I think in many ways it provides the same kind of proactive, in some ways like upfront healing in a weird way, to be able to sit down, whether it's with a significant other, with a business partner even, right? And have a structured conversation about what happens if X bad thing, which is very possible, or even in the case of death, guaranteed.
Yeah.
Or even unlikely, like if I became a worm, would you still love me?
Exactly.
Unlikely, but it's good to talk through the answer.
And the answer is no.
Yeah.
No, you're a fucking worm now.
Actually,
I'm a
making
human
sense.
and I don't love worms.
I need to know that ahead of time. Very important to me to know that
case.
ahead of time. So, but I think it's one of those things where I think it takes a lot of kind of, I guess, trust in that relationship to be able to have that conversation in the first place, right?
And to be honest about
it. Yeah. But I think that's, to me, like if you can't have that conversation with your buddies or your family who you're going to start a company with, what happens if we have to fire you? Mm-hmm. How are we going to do that?
Yeah, and there's no legal terms laid down for how that's going to work,
or even just like, again, problem solving is, because I think if you can get on board, maybe this is a good test. If you could put together bylaws about what happens when you fire each other in your company, and also what that means in terms of like, how are you going to, this is not the bylaws, but just like, how are you guys going to behave then in a family context? After that, talk through it, because again, it could happen. What if the business dissolves because I fucked up a deal? I couldn't get the money from a sale on time, and the business is gone. We just destroyed overnight. So what happens then? How are we?
Have you thought about that?
How are we still in a relationship? Because again, like the thing you're making will someday die, right? Like the studio.
You might die first, but
definitely the thing's gonna go at some point. And so, or even if it doesn't, you have to give it over. It's like you have to eject it. So what the fuck does it mean when that happens to both of you, both in the business context as well as in the just you as people context? Because if you can't talk about
it's the same idea as like a prenup in a marriage, right? Which is
it's similar.
Like just like with anything, a prenup can be wielded for evil, right? But at base, though, like what it's supposed to be for is to make it so that both people come in having talked about the reality of the fact that we're entering into a complex legal contract and
with shared ownership
of assets. And we need to understand and be in alignment on what does that mean? What happens if this partnership dissolves, right?
I think to me it's just,
and if you can't have that converation there,
or
you also can't run a business together, I guess is the short of it.
If you're not willing to have a conversation about that stuff, then like, because again,
that's also a red flag.
It is uncomfortable. Of course it's uncomfortable.
Yeah, it's uncomfortable. Absolutely.
Once you back up on a high level and just get into problem solving, it's very fun to be like, well, if Seth got hit by a bus tomorrow, then I guess we'd have to do like X, Y, and Z things.
Well, yeah, and it's interesting. Yeah, if it falls into like now it's the interesting and fun category. So because like, I think for me, like the one that's the weirdest for the S corp problem, right? Is what happens if one of us gets divorced, right?
Yeah.
To me, that's the most interesting one because our spouses are basically sort of side effect co-owners of the studio. Like they sort of happen to own half of our shares, our individual shares, but only if we get divorced, right? But the bylaws are what they said. The bylaws to like make that be a manageable thing is that what that means practically is that the moment somebody gets divorced, their shares just get bought by the other two, right?
Yeah.
And then
also known as the company, right?
the company buys that person out automatically. It's just what happens. That's what we agreed to in our bylaws, right? And so then now it's like, so say it's me, right? Then now like me and my wife, we just get a third of the value of the company, however we evaluate that, right? And then
you deal with that however the fuck you're going to.
And then we deal with that however we're going to deal with it.
But now drag the company into it, right?
Yeah, but now I'm not an owner of the company anymore. Is actually the outcome of that, right? But,
well, I mean, your wife wouldn't get all of your shares.
No, she'd get half of them, right?
So get half, right?
So
you're still an owner, but
I could rebuy, right? Because I could basically like rebuy my, half of what I used to own's worth with half of the money that I got or whatever, right? So like, but now I'm a minority
it's weird, right?
owner,
because technically you did buy it because you will still own a sixth of the company instead of a third, right? Yeah. So the company, which is you, buys out your wife's shares.
Yeah.
Right.
But now I'm a minority owner in the thing. And so,
but the point is we talked about it, right?
Yeah,
that's
exactly.
what I'm saying.
Like we've got it all written. It was a couple years ago, but
yeah. My point is just it's really interesting because and that you have to work through all this stuff of like what happens if and also just and understand like it gets uncomfortable. There's no world in which like the bad outcomes are also feel fair, right?
Because they're bad.
So what you have to do is like figure out, okay, given that, then the question is how do we all get on board in alignment with just what we think is the best we can do in those scenarios, right? And whether that's in a relationship, whether it's in a business context, whatever it is, the ability to have those conversations successfully is what dictates the ability to work together as a team.
Yeah. And I will say, I know some people are fearful of basically the idea that by, say, entering into like a business relationship with someone who you've been friends with or who's family or a romantic partner, that by virtue of doing so, that like it may change the relationship, quote unquote. I have a spoiler for you, which is that, but also like the relationship changes over time.
Exactly.
And also
that's what I mean. Yeah.
All
it
the
changes when
time.
things change. So yeah, it's going to change.
If your goal is to try to keep your relationship as static as possible, newsflash, it's not going to work very well. It's going to become a bad time,
In many ways, it makes the relationship become more of what it is, right?
That's true.
If you have a lot of distrust coming into it,
it'll still change.
You're going to have even more. Yeah.
And it will. Like it'll reveal stuff, definitely. Like because you have to now talk about stuff you never realized you need to talk about. Yeah. Now you have to, right? And that might, and it is true that the consequence of going through that process can dissolve a relationship, right? As you discover, because things that you had not previously even talked through or thought about, you discover, holy shit, we are way out of alignment on these things. And if you discover you can't get to alignment, then that's true. That's a possible outcome. And of course, that's bad. That's a bad outcome. Nobody likes that. But also, probably that would have happened eventually. You just did it sooner.
Potentially,
You just discovered that you built your relationship castle on a swamp.
Yeah. Well, not even necessarily on a swamp, but just like the reality is that like there's just a lot. And like as pressure mounts, the aspects of your personality in many ways crystallize in certain moments and become more apparent. Diane and I have been talking about this with the whole having a baby thing. It's like just the sheer amount of pressure that our little system is under is enough that some things that previously maybe happened like once every couple of years in a way that was not really noticeable become more interesting and more noticeable as little patterns because you actually get to see them more often, right? Because everybody's under more pressure. In the same way that like in a business context with you guys, there's a lot of things that like I've never had to work through with anybody else in any other context, and certainly not with either of you. Until we were in this
never
exact
would
context.
have if we hadn't worked together.
It never would have. And so, yeah, I think it's one of those things where like, yes, it is wise to ask the question, like, do I want to pressurize my relationship in this way? Can it withstand it? Right? It's a good question to ask.
Fair. That's fair because it's not inevitable that if you couldn't survive running a business together or being married or whatever, that also means your relationship in its other shape was doomed to failure. Or negative even in any way. Because it might be that it just doesn't matter that you're not in alignment on things you
a lot of times
that's
true. Right? Yeah, a lot of times it's true. And I think, we see like the number of divorces that happened during the pandemic, also the number of marriages. But like there's all this stuff happening where you get these moments of increased pressure that cause things that maybe were just kind of hanging out and not really a problem to become suddenly far more apparent, either in their virtues or their issues.
Or we're a problem and a deal breaker, or
exactly. And so it's like there's the pressurization thing, I think, is the question to ask. Like, can our relationship withstand the pressure? And again, if you cannot have that conversation, I don't care how excited you are about whatever fucking idea you got, do not enter into a business.
If you go to your partner and you're like, hey, let's start a business, let's put together some bylaws so we can figure out what, how the structure of the company's going to work and like what happens and blah, blah, blah. And if they're like, nah, fuck it, let's just go.
I just want to make crypto, you know?
It's like, okay, new business partner.
Yeah, do not.
Like, do not do this.
It is, which is the summary, right? The most important thing in any partner is that whatever the kinds of problems that you're going to be facing, you are talking about them and deciding what's going to happen. And you can talk about them. And you can successfully navigate differences in opinion, differences in alignment, to the point where you can come together and be aligned enough. Because the fact is, like, we have little like mini arguments sometimes on the podcast that people hear, right? And we also have lots of debates in real life during our work stuff, right? We're in alignment, but we aren't in agreement.
Correct.
Right? As in, like, we have the same overarching goals. We have similar opinions and beliefs about how the world works, right? But on any given detail, we just disagree, right? On almost anything.
Yeah. But we also recognize how little that probably matters.
Yeah.
Right.
And so much of what we do is we try to figure out how to navigate, like, when are we discussing something because it's just interesting to discuss, right? When are we discussing something because we're trying to solve a problem? And
when are we discussing an alignment issue?
And we're discussing an alignment issue. Yeah. And being able to differentiate all those things, because and accept the fact that it's okay and in fact good to just, because the reason that we also can succeed as a company is because if we were all in agreement on everything, then why have all three of us?
We would just triple down on being wrong about most things.
There's no value to the team in having a bunch of people who just think the same thing, right? The benefit comes in along those disagreement points. So you have to figure out how you're going to navigate that.
Which is also where another potential risk of working with family is if you come from the same background and end up with very similar ways of thinking about things and very similar life experiences, then you don't really get that diversity of opinions about things.
Yep.
We happen to luck out where, like, we grew up together, but we actually had very divergent interests growing up. Mm-hmm. And then we all went to college for completely different things. It had totally different life experiences for a while. Yeah. And then we converged back together. And, Sam and I were joking at the beginning where, like, when it was just Sam and me making games, we would have opposing opinions about things. And it's like, oppositional, meaning like there's two possible ways to think about this, and I'm on one end and Sam is on the other. And then Adam comes in and somehow he finds a third completely perpendicular opinion. That's not even oppositional. It's just over there, right?
Just somewhere else.
So somehow we're all three disagreeing about the same thing
all the time
in multiple dimensions.
And again, I want to point out what was interesting is when we had the conversation about Adam joining full time. Because again, it was a conversation, it wasn't just like,
it was inevitable.
We talked for a long time. There's so many questions because, of course, he just finished getting a fucking PhD. So we were like, "Are you
in biology?
Do you want to do this?" And then beyond the certainty of his, there's also a question. My biggest fear was basically because of this oppositional problem. Like, are we going to have like a weird like 2-on-1 thing for everything where it's like, oh, sorry, you get voted off because and
Sam, I think you were worried that Adam and I would generally agree against you because. Growing up, like Adam and I are closer in age, right? And so growing up, it actually was, for at least some of the time, Adam and me against Sam.
Correct. I was also a baby. Yeah. Because I was 4 and 3 years younger, which is like, that's long enough that I was just kind of annoying,
Yeah. But then once Adam became a teenager, then he was like, actually, I hate both my brothers. They can fuck off, right? Yeah. And like that was the thing for a while. And like we all kind of had adversarial moments in our relationships because, hey, teenage boys, testosterone, bad social ideas, whatever. Like it's just stuff that happens. So some of that baggage comes in and creates concerns when you come back together later in life to form a company. And you talk about
it.
Again,
we talked. I literally said unreasonable concerns out loud. Yeah. And Adam was like, "God, that's not an unreasonable concern."
Yeah.
However, I don't think that's a problem because
I can't guarantee that's not what's going to happen. But I was like, I've never agreed with anybody in my whole life, so I don't think it's going to start now.
Yeah, it might have looked that way earlier, but it was not.
Yeah. And then we had a few. I think we just like worked together for a bit before even you came on full time, just to kind of see how that would be. And it became very clear, like I said, that this was the third leg of a stool thing. Where it was like, oh, actually now we're just fighting about even more things, which is great.
Yeah.
You know?
Well, I mean, and so much of that early time was also us, all three of us trying to navigate, like, when does it matter that the thing that we think is true, that we couldn't get it, because usually our goal is to basically get to a new position that we all agree on.
Yes.
From different starting points, right? But that doesn't happen every time. I don't even know if that happens most times. It happens a lot of the time at this point, right?
I don't think it happens as much now because we're better at focusing on what the actual problem is. As opposed
I think now we care less, right?
Yes.
If we're like if I can tell that, like, oh yeah, the way that I think about this is not the same, right? I'm now much better at telling that, but also it doesn't matter, right? As in, like, at best it's probably a side grade, you know. So like it doesn't.
We
even
know that
matter.
the higher level goal is X, so you know.
Yeah, and we're getting there,
whatever.
and so then it's fine. Yeah.
Well, and with life experience, you realize that your confidence in your own opinions goes down. Right? Like, because you've seen enough things that you realize how you can't possibly know most things, right? And so when you're trying to decide what to do, whether it's like a pricing strategy, such and such, you can come into the conversation with ideas about what you think matters, and what the outcome should be, but you actually can't really prove it.
No, well, that's like, yeah. At this point, none of us, because I think as we've adapted and learned the nuances of the world we live in and the market that we're operating in. Yeah, like if either one of you came to the table and really confident about something, that's when I would be like, all right, I went to fight on this one, not even because I think you're wrong, but because we don't have a right to be confident, right?
Yeah.
But the fact is, at this point, like, none of us are ever confident about anything, which is why it all works. Because what we actually do is we air the laundry of why all of us are not confident, right? And then we talk about it, and then we come up with the best thing that we can. I would say we're never like all fully in agreement that the thing that we chose together is the best one. But we all agree there's no way to know what the best one is.
Well, we agree that it's the best we could come up with at the time.
I think
or we agree that it's good
we're
enough.
agreeing on is that the method by which we've come to an agreement or a decision or something is a good method, right?
Yeah.
On average.
I
think the method
is how I would put it, but
the method is sufficient. We can agree on the method.
It's the best we can do.
Kind of random, depending on the day. Well, fucking know, you know. But like, the method's good.
Which is also helpful for, not for like the whole blame-free aspect. Because like Sammy mentioned earlier, like, what happens if I fuck up a deal, right? And the answer is, like, unless if you intentionally fucked it up, that would be a different question, right? But if it just went haywire, even because of like a bad accident that you made, right, or whatever, like, yeah, I'd have to get over some initial like, oh fuck, But then after that, I'd be like, this is the kind of stuff that happens. So now we figure it out. And if the end result is the studio collapses, then that's just the thing that happened. And we'll move on to the next thing, Like, it doesn't
figure that out now as a team.
Yeah, because
remember, everything dies. Just PSA.
Everything dies. Yeah. And you can't agree that things are uncertain and there's no way to know the truth, but then also get mad at somebody when something they do goes wrong, right?
So in summary, I guess, be honest, working with family is fine, communicate, everything dies.
Yep.
I think it's probably a good uplifting note to leave the podcast.
Yeah, let's go.
All right. Well, we'd like to thank our producers, Fat Bard and Sampa DaCosta, for putting the podcast together. And thanks to our community moderators who keep our Discord running. To get more involved in the Butterscotch community, you can just go to podcast.bscotch.net, where we have links to the Discord, a way for you to donate, and links to the podcast archives. And as always, if you haven't yet, head on over to Steam and give Crashlands 2 a wish list. We're bearing down on launch at some point in the near future. And every little wish list helps boost the thing up on the charts. So we'd really appreciate that.
Get in there.
Get in there. Thank you all for listening. We'll see you next week.
Goodbye.
Bye.